Hey, Brian Miller here, and thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of Thursday Thoughts, all about being average and why it's not as bad as you might think. Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. We have a lot of colorful sayings that warn against making the same mistake twice, and yet we seem incapable of avoiding it. We date the same type of person that we did in our previous toxic relationships. We implement the same failed economic policies over and over. We put projects off until the last minute and then fill ourselves with anxiety over meeting deadlines. What is it about human nature that makes it so difficult to learn from the past? Well, a lot. Way more than would fit into a single YouTube video. Partially, it's that the experiencing self and the remembering self are two very different people. And partly it's that we perceive time in one direction, which leads to weird inconsistencies. Like this one study showed that at each stage of life, people believe they used to be a very different person, but that in the future, they're not going to change that much from who they are now. And then when you catch up with those people in 10 years, they say, well, yeah, 10 years ago, I was a very different person, but now I've pretty much finished changing. And then catch up with those people 10 years later, say, yeah, I know I said that back then, but I was a different person. And now I've really actually finished changing, and it just keeps going. But here, I'd like to focus on one particular cognitive malfunction, so ubiquitous, it should be a constant topic of conversation. And yet, it hardly ever gets mentioned. The superiority bias. On average, you're average. I'm sorry to say it, but you're probably not above average on very many things. It's overwhelmingly likely that you are right in the middle of the bell curve on nearly every measure. And I'm confident saying that because I don't know who's watching this right now, which means on the whole, I'll be right. The thing is, when people are surveyed about their skills versus the average person, we all tend to rate ourselves above average. For example, on a scale of 1 to 10, how good a driver are you? Go ahead, answer it out loud, say it out loud. Okay, now, on that same scale from 1 to 10, how good a driver is the average person? Now, even though you know that I'm making a point, you probably rated yourself a 7, maybe an 8, while you rated the average driver, what, a 4? A 5 if you're being really generous, a 3 if you're being really honest. And the thing is, everyone thinks that way. The wild maniac who cut you off the other day, he thinks he's an 8 and you're a 4 as a driver. And sure, you'll say, most people are idiots who don't have any sense of self-reflection, but I can actually look objectively at myself, and in this instance, I really am an above average driver. Psst, that's the superiority bias again. Most people are bad at self-reflection, but not me. I'm better than most. The superiority bias is so seductive because we have access to our own intentions, but we only have access to other people's actions. So when we make a wild turn or have to slam on our brakes because we were preoccupied, rehearsing an imaginary argument with our spouse, we give ourselves the benefit of the doubt because we know that by and large, we are a good driver. But when somebody else slams on their brakes to avoid rear-ending us, that's a crazy person who doesn't know how to drive. I've been watching in disbelief as colleges, universities, and K-12 public schools in the northeastern United States, where I live, fall prey to the superiority bias. On the whole, the U.S. has done an abysmal job tackling the COVID-19 pandemic. Most frustrating of all is the inconsistency with which the guidelines have been applied. Educational boards, leadership communities in higher ed, they're all safely meeting virtually, putting plans in place to send thousands of young people back into tightly quartered buildings and dormitories. In America, the southern states tend to start the school year a few weeks ahead of the rest of the country. And so, over the last few weeks, we've had a natural, albeit cruel, test case. And most of the results were painful. Many schools barely made it a week before the outbreak was so extensive they had no choice but to shut down the in-person plans and shift to virtual learning. I won't even go into the fact that we squandered an entire summer during which we could have developed a truly exceptional plan for virtual education. We could have reinvented learning for the next year in a way that would protect the community and serve students. What a wasted opportunity. But here in the Northeast, we had the privilege the privilege of watching the devastation play out in the southern states for weeks. And so learning from that, the entire Northeast, a highly educated, scientifically literate, borderline elitist region, took decisive action and shifted virtual before the same damage could occur here. Except that's not what happened. We too just barreled ahead with our in-person or in some cases hybrid models. We assured our students, our families, staff, faculty, and communities that we had taken all the necessary precautions to avoid a similar fate to those southern states. Masks are required at all times, socially distanced classrooms, students are not allowed to congregate in groups, no parties allowed, even off campus. And guess what? It happened anyway. Over the course of just a few days, I watched schools go from 10 cases to 30 cases to 100 cases. That's like 3% of the entire student population in some small state schools. At which point, the state of New York mandated that some campuses shut down all in-person activities for at least 2 weeks. And it's not just one school. This ripple is starting to happen across the entire region and will undoubtedly get worse even before this video is published. The superiority bias strikes again. We're not like those idiots in the South. We're smart Northeasterners. Our students are disciplined. That will never happen here. No, we're average, just like everyone else. So this is a call for compassion. I'm not saying some people aren't better or smarter than others at certain things. Clearly that's true, right? Serena Williams is a far better tennis player than most. Eddie Van Halen is a far better guitarist than most. Barack Obama is a far better public speaker than most. But on average, when you take into consideration everything that makes a human being, even those exceptional people are average. And when you consider an entire community, a region, a country, or the whole world, we're all pretty much the same. Humanity is one. Our differences, while real and sometimes worth fighting over, are fairly insignificant in the face of a virus that just doesn't care where you fall on the bell curve on any particular metric. I was recently discussing the election with someone, a liberal like myself, who said of conservatives, he goes, yeah, but they're just totally brainwashed. They aren't looking at things from all sides. You and I are actually objective. We do the research. We know how to weigh the facts and come to serious conclusions. See, that's a very dangerous assumption that conservatives are somehow other to us, a different kind of person entirely, incapable of weighing the facts on both sides the way we are. It's much more likely that on average, they're average, and so are we. And if we could all accept that, perhaps there would be room for a real conversation. We know where division ends. Let's not go down that road again. Well, that's it for this week's episode of Thursday Thoughts. Thanks so much for sticking with me. As always, my name is Brian Miller, and remember, our world is a shared experience. Every interaction is meaningful, and every person you meet, even virtually, is important. And we'll see you soon.